20 shocking facts about Greenland, which no one will tell you about. A huge but almost empty island. Greenland is the largest island on Earth. Its area is more than 2 million square kilometers. However, most of the territory is covered with ice, and the areas suitable for life are concentrated along a narrow coastal strip. The vast expanses of this island make it comparable in size to Western Europe, but unlike densely populated countries, only about 56,000 people live here. This makes Greenland one of the most sparsely populated places on the planet. The internal areas of the island are endless ice fields, where the temperature can drop to minus 60 degrees Celsius. Even modern researchers can hardly penetrate deep into this ice kingdom because there is a harsh climate and an almost complete lack of life. If we compare the population density, then in Greenland it is less than 1/10 of a square kilometer. This is less than in any other country in the world except for Antarctica, where there is no permanent population at all. Greenland is a place where a person can truly feel like a tiny grain of sand in the endless icy open spaces. A green country that is not green at all. The name Greenland is translated as Greenland, but this name does not correspond to reality. Most of the island is covered with ice, and only a narrow coastal zone is free from permafrost. There is a popular theory that the name Greenland appeared thanks to the Vikings. In the X century, the Norwegian sailor Erik Rydee, expelled from Iceland, sailed to the shores of the island and decided to establish a colony there. To attract settlers, he called the harsh Iceland green, although most of the territory, even in the summer, remains cold and unsuitable for agriculture. However, scientists believe that in the distant past, Greenland could really be more green. In ancient times, before the formation of a powerful ice shield, the climate here was much softer, and in the paleontological layers, the remains of ancient forests, herbs, and even traces of heat. Loving animals are found. Today, only about 15% of Greenland is not covered with ice, and these areas can really become green in the summer. In the short warm season, mosses, lichens, dwarf trees, and even flowers grow here. But most of the year, even these areas are covered with snow, so you can call the island green ground, only with a big stretch. There are almost no roads. Greenland is one of the few places on the planet where there are practically no roads between settlements. Here, you can't just get into the car and go from one city to another. The reason for this is a harsh relief from huge distances. Most of the territory is covered with ice and mountains. Road construction is almost impossible here. Even in non-freezing coastal regions, roads are limited only to a feature of settlements. How then do people move? The main modes of transport here are airplanes are the main way to move over long distances. Internal flights connect the largest cities and villages. Boats and ferries. In the summer, many residents move around the water since almost all settlements are located on the coast. Dog teams are the traditional transport of local residents, which is especially relevant in the winter when snow covers the earth. Snowmobiles are a popular way of movement for hunters, fishermen, and travelers. Even the capital of Greenland, the city of Nuuk, does not have a road connecting it with other cities. To get to another settlement, you have to either fly by plane or swim on the ship. The lack of roads makes Greenland one of the most isolated territories in the world, and a trip to the island is a real test. Incredible icebergs. Greenland is the main source of icebergs in the northern hemisphere. Huge ice blocks break off the glaciers and drift in the ocean, creating exciting and at the same time dangerous natural phenomena. The most famous iceberg, which went down in history, broke off precisely from the Greenland glacier. It was he, according to scientists, in 1912, he ran into the Titanic, leading to the death of the legendary liner. The icebergs of Greenland are of different sizes, from small ice floes the size of a boat to giants with a height of more than 100 meters. But this is only the top. 90% of the mass of the iceberg is hidden underwater, so they pose a serious threat to shipping. Some icebergs can drift thousands of kilometers from Greenland, reaching even the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Their trip can last several years until they completely melt. But these ice mountains are not only a threat, but also an amazing sight. Tourists visiting Greenland can observe how icebergs change color, from dazzling white to saturated blue and even emerald shade. This is due to various density of ice and refractiveness of sunlight. Greenland icebergs are not just a natural phenomenon, but a symbol of the harsh and majestic beauty of the Arctic, the ice shield that hides secrets. Under the surface of Greenland hides one of the most mysterious and poorly studied regions of the planet, a huge ice shield. This array of ice reaches the thickness of more than 3 kilometers and covers about 80% of the island. But what is hidden under this ice shell? Scientists using radar studies discovered ancient mountain ridges, rivers, and even traces of disappeared landscapes under Greenland, which existed millions of years ago. One of the most amazing discoveries is a giant meteorite crater with a diameter of 31 kilometers. It was found in 2018 under the Hayavad Glacier, and it became one of the largest famous craters on Earth. According to scientists, it was left by an asteroid that encountered a planet thousands of years ago. Another riddle is the ice lakes. Despite the extreme cold, there are closed water bodies under the thickness of the ice, where a microscopic life unknown to science can live. These lakes resemble conditions that may exist on the satellites of Jupiter and Saturn. But the main thing that bothers scientists is the melting of the ice shield. If it completely melts, the level of the oceans will rise by about 7 meters, which will lead to flooding of coastal cities around the world. Already now, due to warming, Greenland glaciers lose hundreds of billions of tons of ice every year. Greenland's ice shield is not just an accumulation of snow and ice, but a real time capsule that hides the ancient secrets of our planet and the future of the climatic system of the Earth. Fewer people than in a small city. Although Greenland is the largest island on Earth, its population is only about 56,000 people. This is less than in a small district center and makes Greenland one of the least populated territories in the world. The population density here is so low that one person accounts for more than 35 square kilometers of the territory. For comparison, in Russia, this figure is about 9 people per square kilometer, and in Europe, hundreds of times more. Almost all residents are concentrated in small coastal settlements, since the central part of the island is covered with an ice shield where it is impossible to live. The largest city of Greenland is the capital of Nuuk, where about 19,000 people live. The main part of the population is the Inuits, indigenous inhabitants adapted to severe Arctic climate. The rest are the descendants of the Danes and other Europeans who moved here at different times. Due to the small population, almost everyone knows each other here. In some settlements, only a few dozen people live, and villages are considered large, where there are at least a couple of hundred inhabitants. Isolation and remoteness from the rest of the world create a unique atmosphere here. People live in close connection with nature, far from the fuss of megacities, but at the same time encounter limited access to goods, medicine, and modern technologies. Greenland is one of the few places on the planet where you can feel like a real discoverer in the world that has almost not changed over the centuries. Polar day and polar night. Greenland is located behind the polar circle, so amazing natural phenomena occur here. A polar day and a polar night. Depending on the time of the year, the sun either does not go beyond the horizon at all, or does not appear in the sky for weeks and even months. In the northern part of the island, closer to the Arctic, in the summer the sun shines around the clock. This means that even at midnight on the street is as bright as during the day. This phenomenon is called white nights, but in Greenland it lasts not several days but for months. In the northern settlement, Canada, polar day lasts from late April to mid-August. In winter, the opposite is the contrary. A polar night comes. This is a period when the sun does not rise at all above the horizon, and the only sources of light, the moon, stars, and the northern lights. In some regions, the darkness lasts up to 4 months. These extreme shifts of day and nights greatly affect the psychological state of people. In summer, due to constant light, it is difficult to fall asleep. And in winter, due to the darkness, many develop seasonal depression. To cope with this in Greenland, light therapy is actively used. Special lamps imitating sunlight. But it is thanks to these phenomena Greenland that becomes one of the best places on Earth to observe the northern radiance. In the winter months, the sky is illuminated by the fantastic dances of green, blue, and purple lights, creating a truly unearthly landscape. Greenland sharks' long lives. In the cold water surrounding Greenland, one of the most mysterious and long-lived creatures on the planet, Greenland polar sharks live. These deep-sea giants can reach 7 meters in length and weigh more than 1 ton, but their main difference is the fantastic life expectancy. Greenland sharks are considered the most long-lived vertebrates on Earth. Studies have shown that some individuals have been living for more than 400 years. This means that among them, there may be specimens that appeared during the reign of Tsar Ivan the Terrible. How do they manage to live for so long? Their secret in slow-minded metabolism. These sharks grow extremely slowly, only 1 centimeter per year, and reach puberty by only 150 years. But such a life in the cold has disadvantages. Greenland sharks move slowly and are considered one of the slowest sharks in the world. However, they are excellent hunters and can even attack seals, swallowing them entirely. Another interesting feature is that their meat is poisonous for humans and animals. It contains a substance that causes hallucinations and poisoning, so it must be specially treated before eating. The Greenland shark is a real living relic that has experienced entire eras and still remains one of the most mysterious fish in the oceans, the cleanest and ancient glacial lake. Greenland hides under its ice shield's amazing ice lakes, which existed in a complete isolation of tens of thousands of years. One of the most mysterious is the lake found in 2018 under a 2-kilometer layer of ice. Unlike ordinary reservoirs, these lakes have never seen sunlight and remain sterile because they do not have bacteria and pollution. Ice acts as a natural filter, protecting them from external exposure. Scientists believe that the study of these reservoirs can help understand how life looks in extreme conditions. For example, on the satellites of Jupiter or Mars, where there can also be hidden underwater oceans. Another incredible fact is that Greenland's ice can maintain air bubbles from the atmosphere of the past. This is a kind of natural archive that allows you to study what the climate of the Earth was thousands and even millions of years ago. But there is also an alarming side. Due to global warming, Greenland's ice is actively melting, and the under-ice lakes begin to collapse. This can lead to sudden emissions of huge volumes of fresh water into the ocean, which will affect the sea currents and climate of the entire planet. Greenland underlying lakes are not just frozen ponds, but time capsules that hide answers to questions about the past, present, and future of the Earth. Communication with Vikings. The Vikings were the first Europeans who settled in Greenland. Greenland has a deep historical connection with the Vikings, who were the first Europeans who stepped on this harsh island. More than 1,000 years ago, at the end of the 10th century, the famous Norwegian navigator Erik Ridgja opened and settled Greenland, laying the beginning of one of the most mysterious colonies of the Middle Ages, opening and settlement. Erik Red was expelled from Iceland for the murder and went to explore unknown lands in the west. In 982, he reached the shores of Greenland and called the island Greenland in a dowry GRN land, hoping that this attractive name will attract colonists. A few years later, he returned to Iceland, gathered a fleet of 25 ships with settlers, and founded 2 large colonies in Greenland, eastern and western settlements. During its heyday in the Ebertsasser Athene centuries, up to 5,000 Vikings lived here, which built churches, farms, and trade villages. They were engaged in cattle breeding, hunting, fishing, even traded with Europe, supplying the walrus and animal skins. The mysterious disappearance of the Vikings. By the 14th and 15th centuries, the Vikings completely disappeared from the island, and the scientists are still arguing which caused their disappearance. There are several theories. Climate change. A small ice age made life too harsh. The crops died, and cattle died out. Conflicts with the Inuits. The Vikings could encounter the indigenous population of Greenland and tolerate defeat. The economic crisis due to a decrease in the demand for the walrus. Trade with Europe fell into decay. Epidemics and diseases. Possible epidemics could weaken settlements. Scientists find the remains of their farms, churches, and even ruins of stone cathedrals. No traces of mass graves or traces of violent clashes were found. Communication with modernity. Today in the south of Greenland, you can see the ruins of ancient Norwegian farms and churches, including the famous church in Brook, built in the 15th century. They recall the times when the Vikings tried to make this cold island with their house. Although the Vikings themselves have disappeared, their traces in the history of Greenland still live, and the descendants of the Norwegians continue to live in Denmark and Iceland, preserving the legends about their ancestors' foremen. Huge distances between settlements, neighbor in hundreds of kilometers. Greenland is the largest island on Earth, but there are no roads connecting cities and villages here. Huge distances, ice shields, and a harsh climate make movement along the island with a real test. Lack of roads and isolation. Unlike most countries where the cities are connected by highway and railways, in Greenland, the only way to get from one settlement to another is a plane, helicopter, boat, or snowmobile. The main settlements are located along the coast, and the central part of the island is covered with a glacier, up to 3 kilometers thick, making the construction of roads impossible. Because of this, even neighboring villages can be hundreds of kilometers from each other, and you can get to them only by air or water. For example, the distance between the capital of Nuuk and the second largest city of Sisimiut is more than 300 kilometers, and there is not a single road between them. Flights like bus routes. The air travel here is not a luxury but a necessity. Air Greenland operates internal flights, and they replace the usual ground trips. Even at short distances, people are forced to use aircraft or helicopters. For example, in order to get from Nuuk to Ilulissat, where the famous icebergs are located, you need to fly 1 hour 15 minutes on an airplane. In the conditions of mainland Europe, you can cross the country during this time. However, air travel is very expensive, and for local residents, this is a real problem. Many families for months or even years cannot see their relatives living in other parts of the island. Boats and dog teams. In the summer, ferries that play an important role in the transportation of people and goods run between coastal cities. But in winter, the sea routes often freeze, and then snowmobiles and traditional dog teams come to the fore. Until now, in the northern settlements, the Inuits use classic transport of their ancestors. They go on teams drawn by Greenland likes. This is not only a convenient, but also an environmentally friendly way of movement, which allows you to overcome snow-capped expanses where even snowmobiles can get stuck. What does it mean to live in isolation? Huge distances between settlements create a feeling of complete isolation. In small villages with a population of only 1,500 people, life flows slowly and calmly. But in the case of an emergency, for example, in an illness or injury, it may be a problem to get to the hospital. There are no traditional ambulances in Greenland. Medical helicopters are used instead, but their departure can be impossible in bad weather. Thus, life in Greenland requires patience, independence, and ability to cope with difficulties, because the nearest city or even a neighbor can be at a distance of hundreds of kilometers, a huge contribution to the climate of the Earth. Greenland plays a key role in the global climate, mainly because of its massive ice shield, which covers about 80% of the island. This shield is one of the largest freshwater reserves on the planet, containing about 10% of all world reserves. If it completely melts, the level of the oceans will rise by more than 7 meters, which will lead to flooding of coastal cities around the world. How do Greenland's glaciers affect the climate? Reflection of sunlight, albedo. The white surface of the ice reflects the sun's rays, helping to cool the planet. However, with a decrease in the area of the glaciers, dark areas of land and water are opened, which absorb more heat and accelerate melting. Slow down oceanic currents. Greenland glaciers supply the North Atlantic with cold, fresh water. When this water is mixed with salt sea, it affects the system of ocean currents, including Gulf Stream. The weakening of these currents can lead to sharp climate changes, including cooling in Europe and strengthening storms in other regions. Methane emissions from under the glaciers. Under the thickness of the ice are huge reserves of frozen methane. As the glaciers melted, this powerful greenhouse gas can be released, increasing global warming. Change in precipitation and weather conditions. Intensive melting leads to a change in the circulation of air masses, which can cause extreme droughts in some regions and strong rains in others. Modern pace of melting studies show that the rate of melting of Greenland glaciers over the past 30 years has increased several times. The ice shield loses about 300 billion tons of ice per year. This accelerated melting already causes an increase in the level of the ocean and changes in global weather systems. Greenland is not just a distant snowy island, but a powerful climatic regulator of the planet. Any changes on this island affect the whole Earth, making its melting one of the most serious problems of the 21st century. The only prison with the keys to the prisoners. In Greenland is one of the most unusual prisons in the world. Here, prisoners are not locked in the cells, but can freely go out, go to the store, or do everyday business. This unusual approach to the correctional system reflects the features of the Greenland society, where the crime rate is extremely low, and the main goal of punishment is rehabilitation, not isolation. How is a prison in Greenland? Lack of gratings and protection in the traditional sense. Unlike ordinary prisons, Greenland correctional institutions are more likely to resemble hostels. Prisoners live in small rooms and not in tight cameras with lattices. They can independently open the doors and leave the building at certain hours. Free movement. Convicts can go beyond the prison, but are obliged to return to a certain time. If they do not do this, they can be translated into more stringent conditions of detention. Focus for rehabilitation, not punishment. The authorities believe that isolation and harsh conditions only contribute to the committing of crimes. Instead, prisoners are engaged in labor, study, participate in public work, and undergo psychological support. For light criminals only. Such a system acts only for convicts for non-violent crimes, for example, for theft, fraud, or minor offenses. Those who committed particularly serious crimes can be sent to Denmark prison. Why does such a system work? Greenland is a sparsely populated country with a small number of crimes. Traditional values and social ties are strong here. Therefore, criminals treat the members of society that may change. The harsh climate and the remoteness of cities do not leave the opportunity to escape. It is almost impossible to simply hide in the conditions of the Arctic. The Greenland justice system proves that a mild approach to punishment can be effective. Here, criminals are not just isolated, but give them a chance to correct. And statistics show that most convicts no longer commit crimes after liberation. Northern lights all year round. Greenland is one of the best places on the planet to observe the northern lights. Unlike other regions where this natural phenomenon is visible only in winter, in Greenland it can be observed almost all year round, especially in the northern and central parts of the island. Why is the northern lights so often visible in Greenland? Location in the polar radiance zone. Greenland is located directly under the oval zone of polar radiance, where the Earth's magnetic field interacts with the solar wind most actively. Minimum light pollution. Due to the low sovereign and lack of large cities in Greenland, there is practically no artificial lighting that could interfere with observations. Clean and cold air. The Arctic air is very transparent, which makes the radiance even brighter and more clear. When is it best to observe the northern lights? The best time is from September to April, when the nights are long and dark. In the summer in Greenland, a polar day, the sky remains too bright, but in the northern regions, for example, in the village of Mid-Quartermith, radiance can be seen even at this time. What does the northern lights look like in Greenland? Shine can change colors. Most often it is green, but sometimes it is purple, red, or blue. Huge light waves and spirals dance in the sky, creating an unforgettable sight. In some cases, the radiance is accompanied by a weak hissing sound, but this is a rarity. Observation of the northern radiance in Greenland is a unique experience for which travelers from around the world come here. Unusual Greenland cuisine. The traditional Greenland cuisine is something completely unique and often shocking for visitors. The basis of the diet is seafood, marine animals, and dishes that cannot be tried in other corners of the world. There are almost no vegetables and fruits since the climate does not allow agricultural crops to grow, so local residents have adapted to severe conditions for centuries. The main features of Greenland cuisine. Marine animals. In Greenland, the meat of whales, seals, and walruses are widely consumed. It is rich in fats and proteins, which is especially important in the cold climate. For example, whale meat can be eaten both raw and prepared. Matayak is a whale skin with fat. One of the most exotic dishes is matayak. This is a raw skin of a Greenland whale or a hob with a thick layer of subcutaneous fat. It likes nuts with a shade of fish and has an elastic consistency. Kiviak, rotten seabirds in a seal carcass. This is perhaps the most exotic dish of Greenland. In its preparation, a seal carcass is used, inside which several hundred seabirds are laid, most often giag. Then the carcass is sewn up, covered with stones, and left to be fermented for several months. After that, the dish is considered ready and it is eaten raw. Dried fish and meat. Due to limited access to fresh food, the Greenlanders often harvest fish and meat for the future, drying them out in the open air. Such meat is called pingas and resembles dried meat, but with a more saturated taste. A Coolia delicates, havelak. Another shocking product is a fermented Greenland shark. Her meat is poisonous in raw form due to the high content of urea, but after prolonged fermentation it becomes edible. The taste is sharp, ammonia, but for local residents this is a real delicacy. Morg soup. The Greenlanders are preparing bellied walrus soups, adding fat and spices. Such soup is very high calorie and helps to maintain heat in the cold months. Berries and lichens. Despite the harsh climate, in a short summer you can find a little wild berries. Cloudberry, blueberries, lingonberries. Some types of lichens are also consumed, from which teas and additives to dishes are made. What do tourists eat from this? Many restaurants in Greenland adapt traditional dishes for visitors, offering, for example, a whale or carpaccio steel steaks. However, only the most daring travelers try the most extreme dishes like kiviak or havelak. Greenland cuisine is not just food, but a part of a culture based on survival in one of the most severe places on the planet. Officially part of Denmark, but with complete autonomy. Greenland officially belongs to Denmark, but at the same time has a wide autonomy and actually controls itself. This is a unique situation when a huge island with a special culture, language, and way of life remains in the European state, but has almost complete independence in managing internal affairs. How did Greenland become part of Denmark? Epoch Vikings. The first Europeans who settled in Greenland were the Vikings, led by Erik Reichem in the X century. However, by the 15th century, their colony disappeared. Colonization. In 1721, Denmark again declared Greenland its territory, having begun active development of the island. For several centuries, he remained a Danish colony. Inclusion in Denmark. In 1953, Greenland officially became part of Denmark and received the status of AMT, Administrative District. Autonomy of 1979. In 1979, a referendum was held, following which Greenland received the status of autonomy. This meant that the island received its own government and parliament, and the local authorities gained control over most internal issues. Expansion of autonomy in 2009. In 2008, a new referendum was held, at which 75% of residents voted to expand autonomy. Since 2009, Greenland has gained almost complete independence in managing its resources, economics, police, judicial system, and education. What remains under Denmark? Despite the autonomy, Denmark is still responsible for defense and foreign policy. Greenland does not have its army, and the safety of the island is ensured by the Danish military. Currency, the Danish crown remains official currency. Some state subsidies, a significant part of the Greenland budget is formed due to financial assistance from Denmark. Will Greenland be completely independent? Many Greenlanders advocate complete independence, but so far the economy of the island is highly dependent on Denmark. The main sources of income are fishing and mining, but this is not yet enough for independent existence without financial support. Greenland has already gone a long way to independence, and in the future the island may become a completely sovereign state. But while he remains part of the Kingdom of Denmark, while maintaining his identity and wide autonomy, the northernmost village in the world. In Greenland is the northern settlement on the planet, Sorpaluk. This tiny village is located only 30 kilometers from the polar circle and is considered one of the most extreme points where people constantly live. Facts about Sorpaluk. This is the northernmost permanent village in the world, not counting the military and scientific bases. There are only about 40 people here, most of whom are representatives of the Inuit people. The temperature in winter drops below -40 degrees, and the polar night lasts 4 months. You can only get here by helicopter or dog teams. How do people survive in such conditions? Hunting and fishing. Local residents mainly feed on the meat of marine animals, seals, narwhals, and whales. Also, an important role is played by fishing, especially ice fishing, a traditional lifestyle. The inhabitants of Sorapaluk are still using dog teams as the main mode of transport. There are snowmobiles here, but because of the harsh climate, they often fail. Lack of familiar amenities. There are no shops, hospitals, and schools in the village. Products and goods are brought every few months. If someone needs medical care, it is sent to the larger village of Kainak, located 200 kilometers. Polar days and nights. For 6 months here, it is light for 24 hours a day, and then there is a 4-month darkness. Locals have long been accustomed to such a rhythm of life, but for visitors, this can be a serious test. Sorapaluk is a place where civilization is practically not felt. Here, people live in the same way as their ancestors hundreds of years ago, relying on nature and traditional knowledge. This is one of the most isolated places on Earth, where the tourist's leg rarely steps. Greenland language, Kala-Alasut, is one of the most complex languages in the world, belonging to the Eskimo-Aleit language family. It is the official language of Greenland and has unique grammatical and phonetic features that make it difficult to study. Features of the Greenland language. Polysynthic structure. The Greenland language differs in that the words in it can consist of many morphemes expressing entire sentences. For example, one long word can convey the meaning of a whole sentence in the Russian language. Lack of prepositions. Instead of prepositions, suffixes and postfixes that change the meaning of words are used. This complicates the understanding of the structure of sentences. Complex system of pronouns and declension. There are many cases in Greenland and a complex system of personal pronouns that change depending on the situation. Phonetic complexity. In the language, there are sounds that are difficult to pronounce to the speakers of other languages, as well as many vowel combinations that change the meaning of the word. Rare and limited resources. The Greenland language has little studied in the world, and there are not so many accessible educational materials that it complicates its study for foreigners. Interesting facts about Greenland. He became the only official language of Greenland in 2009. There are many borrowings from Danish in the language, but they are adapted to local grammar. The Greenland alphabet is based on Latin, but some letters are used differently. Due to its complexity, the Greenland language is studied by few, but it remains an important part of the culture and identity of the indigenous population of Greenland. Greenland is rightfully considered the fish capital of the world, since fishing is the basis of its economy and culture. Huge sea spaces around the island are rich in fish and seafood, and local residents have been improving the art of fishing for centuries, making it an integral part of their lifestyle. Why is Greenland a fish capital? Wealth of marine resources. In the cold waters of the Atlantic and the Arctic Ocean, there are many types of fish, such as cod, plague, shrimp, flounder, and herring. Of particular importance is the export of the Greenland plaster and shrimp, which are famous for high quality. The main source of income. Fishing is more than 90% of Greenland exports. This is the main source of the country's income, and most of the population is busy in the fishing industry. Traditional methods and modern technologies. Greenland combines traditional fishing methods transmitted from generation to generation, and modern technologies that allow you to maintain environmental balance and control fish reserves. Environmentally friendly products. Thanks to pure Arctic waters, Greenland fish and seafood are considered one of the most environmentally friendly in the world. They are highly valued in Europe, Asia, and North America. Cultural significance. For the Greenlanders, fishing is not just a job, but an important part of culture. National cuisine includes many fish dishes, such as matak, a whale skin with fat, dried cod, and smoked plague. Interesting facts. Greenland exports more than 100,000 tons of fish annually. Greenland shrimp are considered one of the best in the world because of their sweet taste and dense texture. In the capital of Nuuk, there are seafood festivals where you can try traditional fish delicacies. Thanks to pure waters, huge fish reserves, and centuries-old traditions, Greenland rightfully deserved the title of the fish capital of the world. Greenland is rapidly warming up, and this causes serious changes both in the natural environment and in the life of the local population. The rates of warming in the Arctic are 2 to 3 times higher than the average indicators on the planet, which makes Greenland one of the main indicators of global climate change. How does warming affect Greenland? Melting glaciers. The Greenland ice shield, the second largest in the world after Antarctica, loses about 270 billion tons of ice per year. This leads to an increase in the level of the oceans and threatens coastal territories around the world. Changes in the ecosystem. Ice melting affects the sea currents and water temperature, which changes the living conditions of fish, marine mammals, and birds. Some species, such as cod and shrimp, move to the north, which affects the fishing industry. New opportunities for the economy. With warming, the development of minerals such as oil, gas, and rare earth metals becomes affordable. New shipping routes are also opening that reduce the delivery time of goods between Europe and Asia. Danger for a traditional lifestyle. The indigenous peoples of Greenland, such as the Inuits, are faced with problems. Due to the reduction of ice cover, it becomes more difficult to hunt sea animals, and melting permafrost threatens the infrastructure of settlements. Frequent extreme weather phenomena. Greenland is increasingly faced with abnormal weather conditions, such as summer showers in the center of the glacial shield, which were previously unthinkable. This accelerates the destruction of the ice cover. What next? If warming continues, Greenland can become a place of global geopolitical and economic changes. The discovery of new resources and sea routes will create new opportunities, but the losses of ecosystems and cultural traditions of Inuits can become irreparable. Greenland is a lively example of the consequences of climate change, and its fate largely depends on global efforts to reduce greenhouse gases emissions and adapt to new conditions. The place where you can hear the silence. Greenland is one of the few places on Earth where you can really hear the silence. This huge, snow-covered island with endless ice spaces, deep fjords, and rare settlements creates a unique sense of solitude and peace. What makes Greenland's silence special? Lack of city fuss. In Greenland, there are practically no large cities, traffic jams, and noisy streets. Even in the capital of Nuuk, the most lively place of the country, calm reigns compared to megacities, ice spaces, and absolute silence. Going to the glacier or into the deserted Arctic tundra, you can feel how real silence fills the space. There are no cars, voices, or the usual background rumble. Only rare sounds of wind or cracking ice, sounds of nature instead of noise. In Greenland, silence is not a lack of sound, but the ability to hear what is usually hidden. A soft creak of snow underfoot, a splash of water in the fjords, a distant echo of the iceberg which fails of the glacier. Polar night and northern lights. In the winter, when Greenland envelops the polar night, the silence becomes especially deep. The only thing that can violate it is the crackling of the northern lights, which, according to the stories of local residents, sometimes makes weak sounds, spiritual rebirth, and meditation. Many travelers say that Greenland is an ideal place for reflection, self-awareness, and meditation. It is easy to forget about the bustle and feel unity with nature, the silence that should be heard. Greenland is a place where a person can truly rest from the noise of civilization. Enjoy the grandeur of nature and hear the silence itself, a rare phenomenon in the modern world. Do not forget about the useful services that we indicate in the fixed comments. Subscribe to the channel, like it. Good rest for everyone.